Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, here to share, if you know, one of my awesome worst to best ranking videos. For this particular video, as I'm sure you can tell from the title that you click on, I'll be exploring one of the best video game franchises that has ever been given to the world of gaming, and that is the Bioshock Trilogy. Yes, I have all the games and I have played all of them. And not only will I be ranking all of the main games, but I will actually be ranking all of the DLCs. I believe there was actually one DLC for Bioshock 2 and 2 DLCs that was split into 2 parts for Bioshock Infinite. And I'll just be ranking which ones I like from worst to best. Now, like always, if you do happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep track of me and all my future videos moving forward. And please remember that this ranking is just my own personal opinion, so don't feel too hurt if one entry is placed higher than another. So, without wasting any more time, let's jump into my list, and I'll be starting with my least favorite entry in the Bioshock franchise, starting off with number 6. Ranked lowest on my list will have to go to the Bioshock 2's Minerva's Den DLC. Now, the one thing that all of the Bioshock DLCs have in common is that they all take place in Rapture, with this DLC actually taking place during the events of Bioshock 2. In the Minerva's Den DLC, you will once again take control of another prototype Big Daddy who is given the codename Sigma and has been reactivated, but this time you will have to explore a newer and smaller section of Rapture, with the overall story serving as more of a side story which requires you to recover a set of blueprints and codes from a supercomputer known as the Thinker, which controls all the automation throughout Rapture. Now, I really enjoyed that it had Minerva's Den put in a lot of effort in order to give itself its own identity, placing itself in a different section of Rapture, while also having you face all kinds of different enemies that you wouldn't normally face in the main Bioshock 2 game, and providing you with new weapons and new plasmids and a new tonic in an attempt to make playing as this Big Daddy feel different from the main story's Big Daddy. The biggest flaw that I have with this DLC is that the strength of its entire plot is based upon a specific reveal that I personally didn't find very interesting. Also, because of how short the DLC is, you're not given nearly enough time to become invested in your own character. And I know that Big Daddies aren't very big in terms of individual personalities, but given how well it was handled to play as a Big Daddy in the main Bioshock 2 game was, I think giving Sigma a more personal stake of his own to the main plot would have really helped him feel more like a character rather than just a tool. And it is this element along with its underwhelming twist in the plot that places Minerva's Den DLC lowest on my list. Taking the number 5 spot on my list will have to go to the first episode of the Bioshock Infinite DLC titled Burial at Sea. Now, the cool thing about this DLC is that this is when you will start to see the city of Columbia start to have a connection with Rapture. You will once again take control of an alternate version of Booker DeWitt as he makes his way to Rapture in an attempt to rescue a person who's been turned into a little sister. Now, one thing that a lot of people will enjoy is that the game mechanics to its core take the gameplay style and improvements that were added in Bioshock Infinite and manage to have it work just fine when placed in the familiar atmosphere of Rapture. It was really enjoyable to see what Rapture looked like before everything fell apart, and getting to see Booker interact with Elizabeth after she knows everything provides some pretty interesting dialogue between the two. The biggest issue that I have is because of how short this episode is, which even by a standard playing time can be completed in just under 2 hours. It feels more of a setup for a much more interesting story, which, as I will explain in the next spot, just so happened to be the case, which makes me wonder why Burial at Sea was split into 2 episodes to begin with. It also didn't help that this first episode attempted to add story elements and twists that I either didn't care for or could easily see coming long before they actually happen, which made my first playthrough of this first episode feel kinda underwhelming. But on its own, there's still a lot of fun to be had here despite its short length, which is what places it number 5 on my list. Taking the number 4 spot on my list has to of course go to the second episode of the Burial at Sea DLC for Bioshock Infinite, which really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who has played both of these episodes back to back. Now, while the first episode serves as a setup for the fall of Rapture, this episode actually serves as a direct prequel and setup to the events of the first Bioshock game. This time you will take control of Elizabeth, and she's actually made to be much more vulnerable this time around as she loses her powers to see through multiverses. The gameplay this time around uses the familiar mechanics of Bioshock Infinite, but forces us to apply much more stealth this time around. Because Elizabeth is not too much of a direct fighter like Booker, it would not be wise to take part in direct combat, but instead it would be wise for you to use your limited resources much more effectively to make your shots count. All of these changes add to a completely different tone that is not presented in either any of the DLCs or even in any of the main games, which allows it to stand out even more, granting an impressive level of horror in some moments, and the slower pace actually adds to the story, requiring you to be much more observant to the events that are played out in front of you. This episode also does a much better job establishing the connection between Rapture and Columbia, and out of all the stories that are played out throughout the collection of Bioshock Infinite's content, this episode had by far my favorite ending, which helps grant it the number 4 spot on my list. Number 3 on my list is going to surprise a lot of people, but it has to go to Bioshock Infinite. Now, I just want to put it out there that there's a lot about this game that I absolutely love. The city of Columbia was beautiful and a joy to explore. The enemy variety was very creative and impressive to fight against. I was completely on board with all of the gameplay mechanics that were presented, which helps it stand apart from the first 2 Bioshock games. The story was a blast to go through, and it got even more intriguing as I played through it. Elizabeth is without question my favorite character in the entire Bioshock franchise, not just because of what she brought to the story, but she still remains one of the best programmed and helpful AI partners that I've ever had in any game I've ever played. There is just so much about this game that I still love. Unfortunately, Bioshock Infinite has one of the worst endings to a game I've ever seen. So much that it has hurt my overall experience, and because of that, I've only played this game once. I even uploaded a video early on my channel when I first beat this game that went into detail on this problem. Now, there's a lot of hints on how I believe this game could have gone, and I think that if this game had had a simpler ending, or even a cliche ending, that would have been enough for me to make this game my favorite entry in the franchise. But the inclusion of story elements that I have never liked to the scale that it did ruined what was turning out to be a pretty amazing experience. So much so that I have only ever played this game once. Now, this issue was kind of fixed in the second episode of the Burial at Sea DLC, but after all of these years, I still cannot bring myself to want to revisit this game for a second time. But even so, it still remains a great game, but that ending just helped bring it down to the number 3 spot on my list. Taking the number 2 spot on my list will have to go to Bioshock 2. Now, much to my surprise, I've actually heard that a lot of people didn't really like Bioshock 2 all that much, but I personally really enjoyed what it did. For starters, I really appreciate the game's theme of fatherhood as you take control of a prototype Big Daddy who goes by the name Delta, searching for his specific little sister. Getting to explore Rapture 8 to 10 years after the events of the first game allows us to see just how more chaotic things have gotten, and now that you're playing as a Big Daddy, you get to see the world from a whole different perspective, and it gave me a new level of respect of just how difficult a Big Daddy's job of wanting to protect his little sister is. Now, I will admit that while your specific character is not very interesting personality-wise, I don't really think that's needed, as Jack from the first game didn't have a personality either and was more of a puppet for a majority of the first game. At least Delta has a singular, meaningful objective that never changes over the course of the entire game. Now, the main villain of this game is quite forgettable, but gameplay-wise, it is changes and additions that I've really appreciated. There's even a section where you get to play as a little sister and see the world as they see it, and I think that it is Bioshock 2's ability to show the world from different perspectives in one game that is a strength that neither of the other 2 main Bioshock games was able to achieve. As a Big Daddy, you will have access to new weapons and new upgradable plasmas that you will need, as enemies this time are certainly a lot tougher. Regular splicers seem to have gotten a bit more ferocious, and the introduction of the big sisters was really surprising, seeing what happens when a little sister grows up a bit and gets turned into a weapon that focuses on much more speed and the use of plasmas of their own, providing in some cases a much harder challenge than what was given to us with the hulking Big Daddies in the first game. While Bioshock 2 is not quite as strong as an overall game as the first title, it nevertheless is a great entry and a worthy follow-up to the first game, which helps it get its number 2 spot on my list. In some franchises, you just can't top the original, and that very much is true here, as the first Bioshock takes the number 1 spot on my list. Now, while Bioshock 2 and Bioshock Infinite certainly improved elements that were started in the first game, there was always something that held those 2 games back, whether it was the horrible ending and lack of choice in Bioshock Infinite, or the lack of a great villain and interesting twist in Bioshock 2. That is not the case, however, in the first Bioshock game, as this game provides a strong sense of mystery and horror as you explore Rapture and try to understand exactly what happened and who you are, and exactly what is your connection to the city. Because your character does not say a single word throughout the whole game, the game has to work extra hard to give you your direction, and thanks to its interaction with other characters that you will encounter throughout the game. This game also still has one of the greatest twists in gaming history, understanding the importance of the phrase "would you kindly," which I didn't even notice the first time I played this title. Gameplay wise, there's plenty of exploration and combat with the use of a great collection of different guns that can be upgraded and plasmas that can help you get an edge when fighting the likes of splicers that have gone completely insane and battling the always iconic Big Daddy who roam throughout Rapture protecting their little sisters. There is just no question that to this day, the first Bioshock game can still be considered to be one of the greatest games ever made, which is why for me and many others, it still remains the best Bioshock game ever made, and well deserving of the top spot on my list. And that will just about do it for my personal ranking of all of the Bioshock main games and DLCs that have come up to this point. So, now that you guys know my list, I would like to know, how would you guys rank these amazing games and their DLCs? Share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you all next time.